A day with my new maids, shocking twists beyond imagination. HFY Sci-Fi Chronicles. The morning sun painted streaks of gold across the sky as Ethan Hale leaned against the balcony railing of his secluded estate. The view was breathtaking, but today, he had little interest in the scenery. He was expecting new staff, 3 hand-picked maids from an elite service. The process was usually routine. They would arrive, be briefed, and disappear into the flow of household maintenance. But today, something felt different. A low hum filled the air as a sleek, black hover car glided onto the circular driveway. The vehicle's reflective surface gleamed under the sun, its seamless design hinting at something more advanced than typical service transport. Ethan straightened, a strange sense of unease creeping into his chest. The doors hissed open. The first to step out was a tall woman with a rigid posture, dressed in a standard uniform but carrying herself with military precision. Her gaze was sharp, calculating. Ethan noticed the way she scanned the surroundings, not with the mild curiosity of someone new to a place, but as if assessing potential threats. Behind her, another figure emerged, broader, with an unsettling smoothness to his movements. He had the stance of a trained fighter, not a domestic worker. And then, the last one, a petite woman, delicate in appearance but with an edge to her expression that sent a flicker of warning through Ethan's instincts. He had read their profiles. On paper, they were ideal, efficient, experienced, with stellar recommendations. Yet, standing before him, they felt wrong. Ethan forced a polite smile. "Welcome," he said, keeping his voice neutral. "I assume you've been briefed on your duties?" The first woman nodded. "We are here to serve," she replied, her tone calm but strangely definitive. Something in the way she said it made Ethan pause. It felt less like an assurance and more like a declaration, almost a warning. He led them inside. His estate was vast, a remnant of old wealth and isolation, the kind of place that echoed in silence. He preferred it that way. Control was easier when space was his to command. But as they stepped inside, he caught a quick, near imperceptible glance exchanged between the three. A silent communication. Something was definitely off. He cleared his throat. "Your quarters are down that hall," he gestured to the east wing. "Your schedules are set. I expect things to run smoothly." The tall man nodded. "Understood." His voice was deep, too even, as if controlled. Ethan watched them move. Their steps were perfectly measured. Their eyes barely darted around as if they already knew the layout of the house. For the next few hours, he observed them work. They moved like shadows, precise, methodical. Not once did they hesitate or seem unsure of their tasks. It was as if they had studied the house beforehand, anticipating every detail. By midday, Ethan found himself standing in the kitchen, watching as the smaller woman prepared a meal. Her hands worked with an efficiency that was almost mechanical, chopping, stirring, plating, all with an eerie flawlessness. "Where did you train?" he asked casually. She hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second, but enough. "Various places," she replied. Vague. Ethan leaned against the counter. "And before that?" Another pause. "Private service." She was lying. He had spent enough time around people to recognize when someone was holding back. And she was holding back a lot. He let it go, for now. But suspicion had rooted itself deep. That suspicion turned into full-blown paranoia when night fell. Alone in his study, reviewing reports, he heard it, a sound too faint to be natural. His house was large, but he knew how sound traveled within its walls. This noise was out of place. Slowly, he rose to his feet. The air felt different. Stiller. He stepped into the dimly lit hallway, every instinct on high alert. Then, from the shadows, came the whisper of movement. And Ethan realized he wasn't alone. Whispers in the dark. Ethan's pulse quickened as he moved through the dimly lit hallway. The sensation of being watched gnawed at him, an invisible weight pressing against his instincts. The sound had been faint, too faint, but it was there. His house was old but not creaky. It was built to be silent, and every echo, every disturbance, was something to be noted. He paused, eyes scanning the long stretch of corridor ahead. The air itself felt charged, heavy with something unspoken. His fingers brushed against the edge of the wall as he advanced, slow and deliberate. Then, he caught it. A shadow. A shift. A presence. Just beyond the curve of the hallway, someone was standing in the dark. Ethan exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay composed. "Who's there?" His voice was steady, but his body tensed, ready for anything. Silence. Then, a voice, soft, measured. "Just me, sir." The smaller maid, the one who had been in the kitchen earlier, stepped forward into the dim light. Her face was unreadable, her posture eerily relaxed. Too relaxed. Ethan frowned. "What are you doing here?" She tilted her head slightly. "Night duties." "Night duties," he repeated, suspicion creeping into his tone. "I don't recall assigning any tasks at this hour." A pause. A fraction of a second too long. "We were instructed to ensure the estate remains secure at all times," she answered smoothly. Ethan narrowed his eyes. "By whom?" Another pause. "Housekeeping protocol," she said finally. Lies. His gut told him she wasn't just checking on the house. There was an intent behind her presence, something calculated. "Go back to your quarters," Ethan said firmly, holding her gaze. She nodded once, then turned on her heel, disappearing down the hallway as if she had simply melted into the darkness. Ethan stood there for a long moment, tension coiling through his muscles. Something was wrong. An unsettling discovery. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Ethan remained in his study, sifting through files on his holotable, but his focus kept shifting. His mind ran through the oddities of the day, the precision of the maids, their unnatural efficiency, the way they moved as if they already knew the house. At 2 a.m., he gave up on sleep. Instead, he decided to take a deeper look at their profiles. Pulling up the employee database on his terminal, he scrolled through their records. Everything seemed in order: past employment, training, references. Yet something didn't sit right. He ran a secondary verification check against government records. No matches. Frowning, he tried another method, cross-referencing their biometrics. Again, nothing. It was as if they didn't exist before their employment history began. Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. Either they had been deliberately scrubbed from official records, or they weren't who they claimed to be. A cold realization settled in his gut. Someone had planted them here. The silent conspiracy. Determined to uncover the truth, Ethan accessed the security feeds from earlier in the day. He rewound to the moment the hovercar arrived, watching their movements frame by frame. The way they stepped out, the exchange of glances, the unspoken coordination, it wasn't normal. He fast-forwarded through the footage, scanning their activity. They followed their tasks perfectly: cleaning, preparing meals, organizing spaces, but there were moments, brief but telling, where they seemed to be searching. One particular frame made his blood run cold. In the lower west wing, one of them, the tall man, was seen standing by a locked door. Not just standing. Observing. Ethan knew that door well. It led to his private archives, a place few even knew existed. His fingers hovered over the security override, tempted to lock them all down immediately. But he hesitated. No. He needed to know what they were after first. Taking a deep breath, Ethan powered down the monitor and stood. There was only one way to get answers. Into the shadows. Slipping quietly through the corridors, he moved toward the lower west wing, keeping to the shadows. He avoided triggering any motion sensors, using the blind spots he had memorized over the years. As he approached the archive room, he slowed, listening. Voices. Low. Murmured. He pressed himself against the wall, straining to catch the conversation. The encryption is complex, one voice said. The deeper one likely the tall man. We don't have time for complex, another replied. The first woman. A soft beep followed a failed access attempt. Ethan's heart pounded. They were trying to get into the archives. He exhaled, calming himself. Then, carefully, he stepped forward. Looking for something? The two figures froze. The taller man turned first, his expression neutral but eyes calculating. The woman followed, her body language shifting subtly into a more defensive stance. Ethan folded his arms. My house. My rules. And I don't recall giving permission for midnight break-ins. The woman smiled slightly. We were simply ensuring everything is in order, sir. Ethan scoffed. Try again. The tall man said nothing, but his posture shifted ever so slightly, a readiness, a tension Ethan recognized all too well. They weren't maids. They were operatives. The question was, whose? And more importantly, what were they after? The masks began to slip. Ethan held their gaze, his mind racing through possibilities. These weren't ordinary maids. Their movements, their coordination, their attempts to breach his private archive, it all pointed to something bigger, something far more dangerous than a mere break-in. The woman, the one who had been in the kitchen earlier, maintained her calm expression, but Ethan could see it now, the small signs of calculation, the way her fingers twitched slightly, the way her muscles tensed as if ready to move at a moment's notice. The tall man, however, didn't even try to mask his stance. His posture was subtly angled, prepared to react. Ethan had been in situations like this before. The feeling of being outnumbered, the uncertainty of an opponent's next move, it was an old game. But this was his house. His ground. And he had the upper hand. I'll ask one more time, Ethan said, his voice dangerously low. What are you doing here? The woman tilted her head slightly, as if weighing her response. Then, she smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. Making sure you're as sharp as they say you are, she said. That sent alarm bells ringing in Ethan's mind. As they say? Someone had sent them, specifically for him. His fingers twitched at his side, itching to reach for the concealed weapon in his study. But he forced himself to stay still. Show no aggression. Let them make the first mistake. You've been watching me, Ethan said. Why? The woman's smile didn't waver. Because we needed to be sure. Sure of what? She exhaled, as if mildly amused. That you were still worth the effort. Ethan's blood ran cold. He had been in high-risk negotiations before, had worked alongside powerful figures, but nothing in his past prepared him for this. The tall man finally spoke, his voice measured. We've been tracking you for a while, Hale. And we're not the only ones. That single sentence changed everything. Ethan's mind spun. If they weren't the only ones, then, how many more were watching? How many more had been sent? And for what purpose? He took a careful step forward, meeting their gaze directly. Who sent you? For the first time, the woman hesitated. And then, without warning, a voice crackled through the air. Abort. Now. The woman stiffened. The tall man's fingers twitched slightly. Ethan recognized the sound immediately. A comm unit. Someone was speaking to them. Remotely. The woman's entire demeanor shifted. The careful calm was replaced by something else, urgency. She gave Ethan a lingering look, as if considering whether to say more. But before he could push further, the tall man moved first. Fast. Too fast. Ethan barely had time to react before the man reached into his uniform, producing a sleek, unfamiliar device. A small, metallic cylinder. A disruption charge. Ethan lunged. The room exploded into chaos. The unseen battle. Ethan's instincts took over. He twisted to the side as the tall man activated the charge, sending a pulse of energy rippling through the corridor. The lights flickered, the security systems momentarily disrupted. They were trying to cover their exit. Not happening. Ethan surged forward, his fist colliding with the man's ribs before he could fully activate the device. The impact barely fazed him. Damn. Enhanced. These weren't just spies or thieves. They were something more. The woman moved next fast, precise, her hands aiming for pressure points. Ethan barely dodged the strike, twisting just in time to avoid a disabling blow to his throat. He countered, slamming his elbow into her shoulder, forcing her back. The tall man recovered instantly, swinging with military efficiency. Ethan ducked, his mind running calculations. They weren't here to kill him. If they were, he'd already be dead. No, they wanted something else. Information. Confirmation. He had to turn the tables fast. With a sharp pivot, he grabbed the woman's wrist and twisted, forcing the small metallic communicator from her grasp. It clattered to the floor, and the voice on the other end crackled with urgency. You have 30 seconds. Get out. The woman wrenched herself free, but not before Ethan saw it, the flicker of frustration in her eyes. She hadn't wanted to leave yet. Which meant she still had unanswered questions. Good. Ethan took a calculated step back, watching as the two adjusted their stance. They weren't running. Not yet. They were waiting. And then, a sharp, high-pitched tone filled the corridor. Self-destruction sequence. The communicator. They had no intention of leaving any evidence behind. Ethan duffed to the side just as the device detonated, sending out a controlled EMP burst. His security system flickered out completely. A perfect blackout. By the time his vision cleared, they were gone. The aftermath. Ethan remained still, his breathing steady as his mind processed the events. They weren't simple intruders. They weren't here for money or valuables. They had been testing him. And the fact that someone had been speaking to them, monitoring the situation, meant this was bigger than he'd anticipated. Whoever had sent them wasn't done. And neither was he. Taking a slow breath, Ethan turned toward his now compromised security system. The estate was no longer safe. He needed answers. And if these maids wanted to test him? They were about to find out just how dangerous he could be. The hunt begins. Ethan stood in the darkness of his estate, his heart still pounding from the confrontation. The so-called maids had disappeared into the night, leaving behind more questions than answers. The security system was fried, his private archive nearly compromised, and someone somewhere was watching all of it unfold. Whoever was behind this had underestimated him. Big mistake. Moving quickly, Ethan retrieved a small device from the hidden compartment in his study. It was a backup data node, completely off-grid, immune to remote access and EMP pulses. With a few quick taps, he activated the emergency surveillance system, an entirely separate network he had installed for contingencies exactly like this. The main feeds were down, but his independent sensors still had some coverage. He scrolled through the last few minutes of footage. There. A single frame. The tall man and the woman running. Not toward the main exit, but down. They knew about the underground tunnel. Ethan clenched his jaw. That passage led to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It had been a safeguard, an emergency exit built decades ago. The fact that they knew about it meant one thing. They weren't just watching him. They had studied him. Every fiber of his being screamed that he should follow them now, but Ethan forced himself to think. Rushing blindly into a trap wasn't his style. He needed a plan. With swift movements, he grabbed a tactical pack from his hidden storage compartment. Inside were the essentials: disguises, a silent firearm, hacking tools, and a reinforced wrist device capable of short-range surveillance jamming. They thought they had the upper hand. They were wrong. Into the underground. The entrance to the underground tunnel was hidden beneath the wine cellar. Ethan moved silently, slipping through the narrow space and activating the manual override. The passage door groaned open, revealing a long, dimly lit corridor stretching far beneath the estate. Every step was calculated. Every shadow analyzed. He knew how this game worked. If they were professionals, they would leave no trace. No stray footprints. No obvious signs of movement. But Ethan wasn't looking for the obvious. Halfway through the tunnel, he noticed a small, almost imperceptible scuff mark on the metallic surface of the ground. It was faint but recent. They had passed through here. Ethan smirked. At the end of the tunnel, he reached a rusted door leading to the warehouse. He pressed against the wall, listening carefully. Voices. Faint. Muted. But there. He adjusted the settings on his wrist device, amplifying external sounds. We should have waited. The woman's voice calm but tinged with frustration. A second voice replied, deeper and colder. The mission was compromised. We move forward. Ethan recognized the tone of a soldier following strict orders. No emotion. Just execution. The woman hesitated. He's different from the profile. A brief silence. Then. Adaptation is expected. The objective remains unchanged. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Profile? Someone had built a file on him, studied his tactics, his behaviors. He needed more. Silently, he withdrew a microdrone from his pack. No larger than a coin, the device hovered just above the floor, sliding through the narrow gap at the base of the door. The warehouse interior flickered onto his wrist display. There they were, the two operatives standing near a makeshift command station. A holo display was active, showing a digital interface he didn't recognize. But what caught Ethan's attention wasn't them. It was the third figure standing in the shadows. The ghost in the dark. The third figure was tall, cloaked in a sleek, black exosuit with a faint, shifting texture, stealth-enhanced armor. Their face was hidden beneath a high-tech visor, its display pulsing with unreadable data streams. This was no ordinary spy. They were something else entirely. Ethan adjusted the drone's angle, capturing clearer footage. The woman spoke again, addressing the figure in the exosuit. Do we proceed with extraction? The figure turned slightly, their voice distorted through a voice modulator. No. He's more valuable intact. Ethan's blood chilled. They weren't just after information. They were after him. His mind raced. There were too many unknowns, too many moving pieces. Who were they working for? Why was he the target? And most importantly, how much time did he have before they made their next move? The figure in the exosuit turned to the others. We initiate phase 2 immediately. Ethan had heard enough. He pulled back the drone, disabling it just as the tall man's head snapped toward the door. Time to move. A sudden escape. Ethan retreated back through the tunnel, keeping his movements silent. He had to disappear before they detected him. He had no doubts now, this wasn't some random espionage operation. This was coordinated, calculated. He reached the exit, sealing the tunnel behind him. The moment he stepped into his estate, he activated his emergency lockdown sequence. The security system rebooted on his secondary grid, throwing the house into high alert. He had to prepare. Because the next time they came for him, he wouldn't just be defending. He'd be hunting them back. The trap is set. Ethan stood in his study, his mind processing everything he had uncovered. He wasn't just a target, he was a priority. The agents posing as maids were part of something bigger, something meticulously planned. And now, he had a choice. He could run. Or he could fight back. He smirked. Running had never been his style. He tapped his wrist console, bringing up his emergency countermeasures. The estate's security system was still compromised, but Ethan had contingencies in place. Silent protocols that only he could activate. One of them was Project Hollow Veil. A decoy system. From the outside, it would look like he was operating as usual, following his normal patterns, interacting with digital networks, making scheduled purchases. But in reality, it was all an illusion. Ethan Hale was about to disappear. A call from the past. As the protocol initiated, Ethan activated a private frequency, a line he hadn't used in years. There was only one person he could trust with this. A moment passed. Then, a low, gravelly voice answered. "Thought you were dead." Ethan smirked. "Not yet, but someone's trying." A brief silence. Then, "Location? Secure, for now. But I need information. Fast." The voice on the other end sighed. "You always do." Ethan's grip tightened. "I need a full trace on an unknown operative group. Advanced tech, stealth tactics, attempted deep infiltration. They knew my routines before they even stepped through the door." A pause. Then, a slow exhale. "You've got phantom orders on you." Ethan's stomach clenched. Phantom orders. A Black Ops directive, used for high-value targets who were either too dangerous to be left unchecked or too valuable to kill outright. This wasn't just an assassination attempt. It was an extraction mission. Ethan's mind raced. Phantom orders were rare, issued by organizations with deep intelligence networks. Governments, syndicates, rogue military divisions. Who the hell had put a price on his head? "I need names," Ethan said. The voice on the other end chuckled. "You think it's that easy? You owe me." A sigh. "Fine. But you won't like what you find." "I never do." The line went dead. The Phantom Order revealed. Ethan didn't waste time. He pulled up an encrypted data terminal and accessed his deep network connections built over years of carefully placed favors and alliances. Within minutes, the search results populated. And when he saw the name at the top, his blood ran cold. The Helios Initiative. An autonomous, off-the-books task force operating in the shadows of interstellar politics. Their sole purpose? Recovering or eliminating high-priority assets before they could fall into the wrong hands. Ethan clenched his jaw. They thought he was an asset. He was going to prove them wrong. The ambush. He had less than an hour before they made their next move. If they were following Phantom Order protocols, they would attempt a forced extraction next, swift and surgical, likely using their third operative as the spearhead. Good. He was counting on it. He moved swiftly, setting up the estate as a battlefield. Automated defense drones? Disabled. Escape routes? Blocked. He wanted them to think they had him cornered. Then, he waited. And, right on schedule. They came. The night attack. A single, almost imperceptible click echoed through the silence. Ethan didn't move. Then. Boom. The power grid cut out, plunging the estate into darkness. He smiled. They thought they had control. They didn't. A faint distortion shimmered through the shadows' active camouflage suits. They were already inside. Ethan remained still, his heartbeat steady. He had counted 3 targets. Now, there were 4. He let them come closer. 5 feet. 4 feet. 3. Then, in a split-second movement, he struck. The predator becomes the prey. Ethan twisted, his fist colliding with the nearest operative's visor. The impact shattered the stealth module, exposing their face, a woman with cold, calculating eyes. Not one of the maids. This was their leader. She recovered fast, striking back with precision. Ethan barely dodged, twisting to avoid a secondary attacker coming from the left. The tall man, brutal, efficient, came at him next. Ethan caught his wrist, twisting it until a sickening crack echoed through the dark. The third attacker, the hidden one, moved next. Ethan barely saw the exosuit shift before the electric baton slammed toward his skull. He ducked, rolling away. They were fast. Trained. Predictable. But Ethan wasn't fighting to survive. He was fighting to win. He activated the countermeasure drones hidden in the ceiling. With a sharp, piercing whine, a burst of electromagnetic pulses filled the room. The stealth suits failed instantly. The exosuit's power core flickered. And suddenly, Ethan wasn't outnumbered. They were. A reckoning. The leader, now fully visible, glared at him. "You're making a mistake." Ethan smirked. "I don't make mistakes. I make plans." She lunged. But this time, Ethan was faster. A single shot, silenced, precise, non-lethal, hit her in the leg. She collapsed, gasping. The tall man tried to move. Ethan put him down with a strike to the throat. The third one, the exosuit operative, staggered, their suit barely functional. They hesitated. Then they ran. Ethan let them go. He had what he needed. The final interrogation. The leader groaned as Ethan crouched beside her. "You lost," he said. Her jaw clenched. "You think this ends here?" Ethan's expression darkened. "It does for you." He tapped his wrist device, sending a direct message. The Helios initiative was coming for him. But now? He was going after them, striking back. Ethan stood over the fallen Helios initiative operative, the woman gasping through clenched teeth as pain radiated through her wounded leg. Blood pooled beneath her, dark against the polished floor of his estate. The battle had been swift, brutal, but more than that, it had been revealing. They hadn't come to kill him. They had come to extract him. And that meant whoever was pulling the strings wanted him alive. Ethan crouched down, gripping the woman's chin roughly, forcing her to look at him. "Tell me who gave the order," he said, his voice calm, cold. She glared at him, refusing to speak. Ethan sighed. "You're not the first person who's tried to make me disappear, and you won't be the last. So let's not waste time." He reached into his pack, pulling out a sleek, needle-thin device, a Neuralink disruptor. A tool designed to override cybernetic firewalls, capable of breaking into the brain's cognitive barriers. He held it up so she could see. This is going to be unpleasant," he murmured. "Unless you start talking." Her breathing hitched. He had her attention now. The Helios Initiative trained their operatives to resist traditional interrogation techniques, but neural disruptors? Those were another story. Breaking the silence. She clenched her jaw. "You have no idea what you're interfering with." Ethan tilted his head. "Enlighten me." Silence. "Fine," he said, activating the device. A thin, blue pulse of energy crackled over her temple. She jerked violently, her pupils dilating, her body spasming slightly before going rigid. The disruptor didn't torture, it simply overloaded neural inhibitors, making it nearly impossible to lie. Ethan leaned in. "Who sent you?" She gasped, her voice breaking against her will. "Sector 9. Division Omega." Ethan frowned. That wasn't an official military designation. He increased the disruptor's intensity slightly. "Who runs it?" She shuddered. "Codename, Aegis." Ethan's pulse spiked. That name, he had heard it before. Aegis wasn't just some shadow operative. Aegis was the name whispered in high-risk intelligence circles, a figure who had ties to nearly every major faction, corporate, military, black market. A war strategist. A tactician who specialized in control. And now, Aegis wanted him. Ethan deactivated the disruptor, standing up as the woman slumped, barely conscious. He exhaled. This wasn't just a hunt anymore. This was a war. A call from Aegis. Ethan activated his terminal, running a backtrace on the woman's cybernetics. The second he did, a direct transmission came through. "Ethan Hale." The voice was modulated, smooth, with the eerie quality of someone who had long abandoned emotion. He didn't answer. The voice continued. "You should have come quietly." Ethan smirked. "Yeah? Well, I have trust issues." A pause. Then, "You've made this personal." "Good," Ethan shot back. "I love personal." Aegis exhaled, as if mildly amused. We will find you, Hale. You are an asset. Whether you believe it or not. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Let me make one thing clear, I don't belong to anyone. Not you. Not Helios. Not whatever shadow network you operate from. Aegis didn't respond immediately. Then. You misunderstand. We don't want to own you. Ethan felt the hairs on his neck rise. Aegis' voice dropped lower. We want to wake you. The transmission cut off. Ethan's fists clenched. This wasn't just about extraction. This was about manipulation. And he was done playing their game. The hunt begins. Ethan wasted no time. With Aegis aware of his resistance, he needed to act first. He had one lead, the Sector 9, Division Omega designation. It wasn't an official governmental tag, which meant it was either off the books, or worse, a private entity masquerading as a Black Ops division. He ran a deep scan. And then. A match. A high-security research installation, off-grid, unregistered, buried beneath an asteroid colony in the Draconis Void. A hidden Helios Initiative stronghold. His smirk returned. They thought they were hunting him. Now. He was hunting them. He grabbed his gear, activating his stealth shuttle's launch sequence. Helios had made their move. Now it was his turn.